Hi, this is Satnam Bharti, and we are here today in our podcast. And today we are going to talk to an old friend, Radhesh Menon, who used to be Radhesh Balakrishnan, but for some reason he has changed his name. We won't disclose why he did that. Maybe later. So let's talk to Radhesh, who has joined Robin Systems as their new Chief Marketing Officer. Radhesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And so tell us a bit about your new this move in your career. Why you decided to quit your previous job, which I'm sure we have talked so many times, we all enjoy it, and move to Robin Systems.
Yeah, first off, I had a fantastic almost 6-year journey at Red Hat. So that was the first time I got the opportunity to work in open source, having worked prior to that at Microsoft. So, clearly when it comes to open source, Red Hat is the place to learn, etc. The move towards Robin was primarily motivated because of two aspects. So one is, if you look at the snapshot of what is happening in the technology landscape, containers, Kubernetes is where the action is. The second motivating factor is I eventually want to get to a stage I want to run an organization, independent of the size of it. So being able to go up the totem pole and making sure that I can interact with board and other interesting aspects when it comes to a startup was a draw when it came to Robin. Probably the cherry on the cake is the fact that Robin is, in the context of both Kubernetes and containers, addressing a problem space that none of the other players have effectively addressed. And in fact, some players are just beginning to talk about that as a potential area that they want to address, which is all about how do you effectively deploy and manage stateful applications, rather than the primary focus being all around stateless applications. So hopefully we'll get to talk about that more.
Excellent. And why Robin System? There are so many companies. What attracted you towards Robin Systems?
Yeah, so I think we were just touching upon the fact that as far as if you look at Kubernetes orchestration solutions that are out there, last count, there were north of 50 of them. And then I believe 30 some are actually certified by CNCF, etc. And if you were to map them in terms of what is the value proposition that they're all after, there's a lot of similarity in terms of going and enabling the DevOps culture, enabling platform as a service capabilities, to developing cloud native applications, which are architected fundamentally differently. Now, a problem space that hasn't been addressed in that context is, as much as containerization and driving agility around deployment is a large priority for CIOs, driving big data, artificial intelligence, machine language, as well as continuing to invest on data as part of the journey towards digital transformation is also equally high in that top list of things that CIOs care about. So Robin has done a great job of tying these two priorities together by effectively addressing the problem space with a solution called hyperconverged Kubernetes platform, which, as somebody closely following the space, hyperconvergence talks to the fact that you can bring together compute, storage, and networking in a rich manner. In the problem space that we are talking about, which is databases, artificial intelligence, machine language platforms, etc., you need to have an awareness of the state of the application for you to be able to bring value, right? So hyperconvergence is the answer to be able to bring that state, and Robin has done an effective job of having a solution in the market to roll it out. So my job becomes an easier job of making sure that this exciting technology, the value proposition, reaches as broad an audience as possible through interactions such as the one that we're just having, so that customers can get the value out of that.
I'll just kind of step back for a second, just so that our viewers also know because everybody I talk to, somebody in the hyperconvergence space, depending on who I talk to, they have their own definition. So according to you, what is hyperconvergence?
So we are essentially operating off of the definition that Nutanix, which is the kind of the initial player who popularized this, which is all about you bringing together compute, storage, and networking in a richer, tighter, integrated manner, so that you can address the needs of a workload effectively. So in the case of Nutanix, the journey was primarily around VDI as a bear of a workload to manage. The focus was on hypervisor as the virtualization technology. And then, today Nutanix has grown to become a multi-billion-dollar organization with a market cap north of 10, 15 billion, etc. Right? So, as they say, the rest has been history. From our vantage point, what we are saying is, look, if you were to take a snapshot of what virtualization technology is prevalent and being adopted massively, then containers or containerization is the answer to that. If you ask the question in terms of what orchestration mechanism is being used to manipulate as well as manage the lifecycle of containers, it's Kubernetes by default, with an amazingly vibrant ecosystem that CNCF is doing an awesome job of nurturing. So taking the concept of hyperconvergence and with the modifications that, hey, look, it's got to be containers based, it's based on Kubernetes, and we have built full storage and meet the need workloads. In this case, like I earlier touched upon, the workloads are data-centric workloads or stateful workloads, which not only require you to have an understanding of the distributed nature of several of these applications, but also need to have the ability to understand, maintain, track state on an ongoing basis, right? So that's what we've done from a plumbing perspective, from a storage perspective. So a little bit of a long answer on a simple question, but hopefully that gave you the flavor for not just the definition that we are operating in, but also the value that we are bringing in being able to put together one integrated solution across containers for compute, open networking solutions, OVS, and block storage solutions that we have built ground up based on the assumption that none of the existing storage solutions have the capabilities needed to meet the address the problem space we are talking about.
Excellent. Since you have joined the company and now beyond vision, you have to solve realistic, practical business problems. So what are the business problems that you see for Robin Systems customers or new potential customer that you see need some help, and that's where Robin Systems. I mean, you did touch upon, but I wanted to very concrete focus areas.
Yeah, so I can view that question from two perspectives, right? So one is, which sets of customers are we after, and what problem sets that are we trying to address in that context? And then secondly, as a startup, which is in early stages, we just went through Series B round of funding. What are the challenges that we have, right? So hopefully both will be helpful to your viewers. Now, from an outside-in perspective, when you ask yourself the question of, hey, which are the customer problems that we are trying to address? Before I rush to answer that, it's important to base ourselves on some of the underlying assumptions here. I think the assumption that hybrid cloud is the normed implementation across organizations of all sizes is still a valid one. Multi-cloud as an approach to make sure that the fears of lock-in when you're going full on into public clouds, especially as a destination, is a desire that customers have. So within that backdrop, the fundamental problems that customers are trying to address are, how do I drive agility? How do I drive value from data in my journey towards digital transformation, right? So that's at the higher level abstracted set of needs that customers are expressing. Now then, on top of that, if you overlay, okay, there are a few personas that have a critical role in being able to effectively address these challenges. On one end are I would call it the new age cool kids within any organization who are bringing in the new way of developing applications from a cloud native perspective. The challenge they have is, technologies such as containers, Kubernetes, etc. While it's fast evolving, it's not able to address all the needs, especially the need areas around stitching together a self-service infrastructure for databases, ranging from Cassandra to any of the MySQL databases, etc. Right? You're able to do everything but that, right? So that's one problem space that we are locking on. The second bucket in terms of data-driven anything from a digital transformation is a key agenda that a lot of customers are pursuing. In that context, the problem that we are trying to address is, what if you could spin up, deploy, manage, shrink back if need be, Hadoop clusters or big data clusters, generically speaking, independent of the particular vendor or platform you're going for, then you're going to be adding more fuel to the fire and being able to drive the digital transformation agenda. And then the third, business problem or opportunity that a lot of organizations are pursuing is this whole space of AI and ML, right? So, how can we bring the same value proposition like I touched upon earlier for big data into AI ML space too, because there also the tools are evolving with different architecture, etc. So how do you get away from having to invest lots of people just to manage that infrastructure, because you want to take away those resources and then apply towards getting the benefit out of the technology investment rather than trying to make that technology work.
Excellent. Since we're touching on all those technologies which are also emerging technologies, they're just popping up recently. Machine learning and artificial intelligence has been there forever, but we are seeing them, in products, whether it's IoT or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So even Kubernetes is very new, only 4 or 5 years. So how many of these technologies that you're talking about, or your customers, they are running in production versus they are just evaluating, whether it's machine learning or Kubernetes or anything else?
Yeah, it's more rapidly maturing as we speak, right? So when I kind of look at the early set of customers that we have, we have a large travel company based in Europe who are in production with Kubernetes, and they've taken the approach of, for stateful workloads, they go with Robin, and for stateless workloads, they're using one of the other Kubernetes provider, right? So that's one example of a large organization well down the path. But every day they're trying to see, okay, what other workloads that we can onboard here, right? Another example that's crossing my mind is a well-known large technology powerhouse, which is thinking about how can they fundamentally change the way in which they are delivering a database solution that they have in the market, right? So their developers are used to DevOps and embracing the new way of doing things, but they want the same experience to be made available to their end customers too, right? So I think a fairer way to characterize this is, it's still in probably, to use a baseball analogy, like a top of the second inning in terms of where the game is. But the game is a very fast-paced game with a lot of interaction and a lot of innovation happening, right? So that's what makes it exciting, and I believe this is going to be the focus area for the next 3 to 4 years, from a frontier where lots of the deployment management operational challenges are knocked off, so that large-scale deployments become easy to envisage and deploy, rather than taking baby steps, which is kind of the risk-averse approach to take.
Right, but it also depends the stage where you are right now. The challenge also, it changes. It's where you are in the game. So right now, at this phase, let's take an example of machine learning. What are the challenges that customers are facing when they are embracing, or they're exposed to these new technologies, whether it's migrating their workloads, or you talked about DevOps, which is more cultural versus technical. So what are the big challenges that your customers are facing when it comes to machine learning and these new technologies?
Yeah,
in the stage area.
Answer this question as well as the point that you raised earlier in terms of maturity, right? So another way to look at the problem sets that Robin is addressing is across three lenses, right? So one is just look at traditional Oracle database form, right? Or a DB2 form for that matter, right? So how do you make sure that those infrastructure, which typically tend to be, especially if it's on-prem, 100% bare metal, how do you bring agility by virtualizing using containers and take away the pain of operational management, such as snapshots and rollbacks, etc. Right? So that's one problem set. Now that one, as you fully well know, database technologies have been in existence for such a long time, and several of these problems have been in existence for a long period of time. So these are things, a couple of customers that we have where we're just focused on, this is not futuristic as much as just bringing in the value of agility into a well-established data infrastructure. So that's one problem space. Second, you go in an area that you can go where the maturity is a little bit more is the big data space, right? Be it, Hadoop, Cloudera, etc., where the initial prove outs in terms of deployment has happened. Now it's more a question of, depending on where the business drivers are, getting to larger size, become very prevalent, etc. So the problem there is, how do I make sure that I'm not, incrementally and linearly increasing the IT administrative staff as I am increasing the size and footprint of these technologies? And the challenge comes from the fact that these are distributed systems which require some knowledge of how they are architected for you to be scaling, number one. Secondly, there's a lot of open source sets of tools and technologies that is driving the space itself, which has the positive point that, hey, it removes the vendor lock-in, etc. But as you fully well know, it also does introduce a learning curve. If you're not already well embraced in the open source way of living, does introduce a barrier to adoption. So our opportunity here is to be able to tackle both the challenges, which is, how do you make sure that you don't need hundreds of people to manage the infrastructure by delivering app store-like experience where using single click, you can deploy and manage Hadoop cluster and scale and, do some of the maintenance tasks associated with it, or Cloudera, or insert your favorite vendor here, right? So that's one aspect of that. And then in terms of open source familiarity, if you kind of look at beyond the early majority, even for the long tail, you don't have to be a super duper expert in all things open source for you to be able to use Robin Kubernetes platform, because we have abstracted away all the challenges and presenting more of a web UI driven, simple YAML file through which we capture the, components and requirements, and then take you straight to the self-service window. So your life from thereafter is, beautiful and Apple-like, if you will, right? So that's the second problem space. And then the third one is the AI ML space. And here's where you were asking, hey, look, it's a little bit more of an emerging space. The buzz is probably more than where the production deployments are. But some of the challenges that I touched upon, both in terms of, the open source nature of the tools and technologies, and or the distributed nature of the different tool set, and then the ever increasing number of tools, etc., does introduce challenges in terms of how can you take a life cycle approach towards deploying, managing that, right? So from our, vantage point, the third space becomes the one that where, we'll have to do way more to keep up with all the developments in there, whereas the database space is one where we've already sort of addressed the challenges. As long as it runs on Linux, we have a solution for you, is our response when it comes to the database challenge. Hopefully that little bit of a long answer gave you the sense in terms of both the maturity of the different technologies as well as the challenges customers are facing and Robin's value proposition in that space.
No, excellent. You explained very well, and that's why I love to talk to you. They're not one-line answers, which I despise. Since you have mentioned open source a couple of times, traditionally Robin Systems is not an open source company. You do consume a lot of open source, if I'm not wrong, and you do contribute whenever needed. But since you're coming from a fully open source background, number one is what is your perception of Robin Systems, from the perspective of open source? Second is your arrival. Will it change anything in terms of increasing either contribution? Of course, you are consuming already a lot, or engagement with the open source communities?
Yeah, I'll answer sort of the last part of it, which is, we've just announced and released the hyperconverged Kubernetes platform. In other words, including Kubernetes, which is, as you know, 100% open source, and getting to CNCF certified solution, which we, by the way, happy to say that we've passed the test as well. So that's the first step in being a healthy consumer of open source. And as you fully well know, to be a rightful participant in this community, giving back and contributing back, is part of the value proposition. So we're beginning to shape what does active participation in CNCF community would actually mean, and how can we be a good, healthy citizen in that space. So I don't have hey, these are the 3 things that we're going to do answer as yet. It's only week 2 in my job, but this is a top-down area of interest for the organization. Now, the second vector or point of thought that I want to introduce is, I've spent enough years at Microsoft, which, by the way, has embraced open source, and then, last almost 6 years at Red Hat as well. And the conviction that I have is that, yes, open source is important, but the 9 out of 10 times, the most important thing that customers are asking for is make it easy for me to live with, these solutions, right? So from that perspective, being able to drive the adoption of something like Kubernetes in a much more larger scale is also a contribution to the open source community. It's not as much direct as cutting a few lines of code and contributing to the upstream project per se, but then in many ways taking the opportunity spectrum of where Kubernetes can solve somebody's problem to beyond the stateless to stateful is also another way to drive mainstream adoption of Kubernetes, right? So I'm viewing that as much a part of the value that we bring to the equation.
Okay, this we might guess kind of we might take a detour from the actual focus, but and the reason I'm talking to you because you have been with one of the largest open source community for a very long time, and as you join Robin Systems, you will still continue. But sometimes when we do talk about open source, we get so stuck with the code contribution and the open source nature that we forget that code alone is not sufficient. Look at farming. Okay, you do farming, but you also need transportation. You also need restaurant chains. You also need somebody to deliver the goods. You also need somebody to package it. So the ecosystem goes beyond the field where you actually toil with sweat and blood. But the moment people talk about open source, they just think only about that field where you're working. And since you are in a place where I can just talk about it quickly if you want to, is that these other part of the ecosystem play equally important role. Okay, you get the code which is available for free depending on the license which you can use, but not everybody is Red Hat, not everybody is SUSE, or not everybody is AT&T where they have all the resources in the world to hire all the developers. And so we do need players who can be the transportation agency, who are the restaurants, who are turning that produce into actual product.
I love the analogy that you used, and absolutely right on the money, right? as you fully well know, my prior role at Red Hat was around OpenStack, and the number one challenge when it comes to OpenStack is about the complexity that it introduces. And so a significant amount of energy as the product team, as the one running the product side of the equation, we were focused on was how do you remove that complexity so that more and more can consume that, right? So building off of that experience, and then more talking to what you're highlighting as, hey, look, you got to have a system view of what is the ultimate impact of that piece of technology is. And there's going to require different types of players who need to add value, ranging from the ones who are going to excel in contributing code more than others to the ones who are going to take away the complexity and make it easier for, I would use the phrase, mere mortals to be able to consume and get the benefits of that, because that is, I would say, even more important than just having the piece of code, because this industry is well known for so many pieces of software that are well architected, well intended, etc., but not really seeing the light of the day in terms of customer adoption because of complexity and not being able to effectively address the average, quote unquote, average user, right? So that's where I think Robin's simplicity philosophy, and let's hide the complexity down so that let's start focusing more on a application-driven infrastructure bodes very well for the longer-term health of open source ecosystem as well.
Right. So we talked about your role. We talked about the challenges your customers are facing. We talked about the focus area that Robin Systems has. Anything else you think that, we should have talked about that?
I think it's more your leaders. Look, as I earlier acknowledged, as a startup, one company which has gone through Series B, our probably biggest challenge is being able to reach as many customers as possible, with the value proposition that we have. So I would, encourage the viewers of the podcast to go to our website, which is robin.io, and kick the tires on a trial that we have, a free trial which is web-based, or soon we're going to be having a downloadable trial as well, so that you can play either on your laptop or you can bring it into your infrastructure and realize the power of what we're talking about, which is how do you harness the power of containerization and Kubernetes as an orchestration engine to fundamentally take the pain away from databases, artificial intelligence, machine language, as well as big data implementation. So, and beyond that, I guess, Swapnil, one more ask I have of you is, let's keep these dialogues ongoing as well. So look forward to staying in touch as well.
Yeah, of course. I think we meet at least 3 or 4 times a year. Maybe we can increase the frequency. You can be a regular on this podcast to talk about it. But I would like to thank you for taking your time today and talking to us. And so we learn more about not only Robin Systems but also my old friend. What you are planning to do next. And as usual, we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you again, Swapnil. My pleasure.